This is the ultimate photography filter challenge, and in this video we're going to be testing out all the different kinds of filters and if there is a best solution. And at the end we're going to be looking at all these photo examples side by side to discover what the true answer is for photography filters. Now, here's my big problem with filters, is that you get out to the field, you're so worried about getting the right exposure, the right settings, everything, even the kinds of gear you want to photograph with, and then filters just throw another wrench into the bunch. I want to simplify my shooting, and I know a lot of you guys do too, and filters just clutter it up because they cause me to fumble around with more gear in the field. So not only do you have to carry all these extra pouches with you, but you also have to carry all the attachments to them as well, which can just be all these little rings that you have to keep up with and can be very annoying. Now, I use all different kinds of filters, Nisi, Polar Pro, Haida. Let me know what kinds of filters you're using down in the comments. I'd love to check out more options and see if they would fit my photography as well, and other people watching this too. Now, since there is one filter I believe every landscape photographer should have in their bag, that's the circular polarizer. I'm not gonna be testing that one today because I do firmly believe that you have to use that one. You have to have it in your bag for waterfall photography, but we are gonna be testing the other two types of filters in this video. First, we're gonna be looking at a graduated ND filter. Now, these will darken the sky when you have a lot of dynamic range, meaning a really bright sky and a really dark foreground, and it'll help you darken that sky out. Now, there are two other ways of doing this without using a filter, which I want to test. Number one, this camera, the OM1 Mark II from OM System, actually has this graduated ND filter built into it. So I want to test it side by side with the actual filter. And then you can also do this same effect in Lightroom, just clicking and dragging a filter down to a normal file. So I want to test that one side by side too. Now, it is actually bright enough out here to where I don't need a tripod to do this, but I do need to hold the Grad ND filter over my camera to actually take a photo. Now, after this test, I'm gonna get to the ND filters that we're gonna be testing too, but I'm gonna be shooting all these at the exact same settings to be as fair as possible. 1/200th of a second, f8, ISO 200 at 25 millimeters. So basically just hold this up, line up the horizon line with the gradient, and take a photo. So it's pretty much that easy. Next, I'm gonna test it in camera to see if that works just the same. So I'm gonna hold these settings here. This is a 4-stop Grad ND. Lastly, I'm just gonna take a standard photo and do the Lightroom version of that in the next section. We'll look at all these photos side by side in Lightroom at the end of this and compare everything. But first, if you want to improve your landscape photography, frame up a scene like this and have the right composition at the right time to get the stellar shot, I want to invite you to a free landscape photography masterclass that's going to show you everything you need to know about how to take better landscape photography. That is in the video description down below and in the pinned comments as well. Next, we're going to be looking at the ND filters. Now, the ND filter is different from the Grad ND filters because the ND filters basically just darken the entire frame. So I'm going to be using this ND64 and also using the ND64 filter built into this camera, the OM System OM1 Mark II, not sponsored by OM System, by the way. So first I'm going to do the ND filter on the actual camera here. So I'm going to go into my menu, go to Live ND shooting on, and go to ND64. And that's actually 6 stops that allows me, this camera allows me to hand hold that at 6 stops, which is pretty insane. So I'm just gonna frame this up and take the photo. Then I'm gonna do the same thing with this ND64 filter. I'm just gonna hold it over the front of the lens like this. And it's important to remember that when you're doing this, you need to set your lens to manual focus so that your camera isn't looking for focus with this really dark piece of glass over the lens. Let's look at these image files. So the first photo that we have here is shot with the Grad ND filter that was used in the field. Remember, those are clunky. It's kind of a weird setup to actually put them on your camera and get everything going right, but it does produce a really good result. The only problem that I have with these is there's no control over where that horizon line comes into the photo, and that can obstruct mountains, trees, or other objects that are above that horizon line that you may not want obstructed with your graduated ND filter because it just does have that straight line across. Other photo that we took here is from the in-camera grad ND. So you can see that it does a pretty similar job. If I just go back and forth between these two, I do feel like the foreground is a little bit brighter in the one with the grad ND that was built into the camera. So far I'm liking that one the best, and conditions out there were pretty similar in the partly cloudy sun, but the horizon line is looking pretty much where I want it to be with this photo specifically because it's not intersecting with any of those trees. Now you can tilt the horizon line in camera, but the thing about it is you're still getting just a straight line going across, which can also obstruct trees, mountains, or anything else in the system. Now I'm going to show you how to do this in Lightroom digitally with post-processing. So here's our photo that we have here. If I go over into my masking, I'm going to select a linear gradient. And when I pull that linear gradient down, you can see that there's a white bar here. Anything in white is going to be affected. So if I pull that down, you can see that it's pulling a linear gradient down into the photo that acts just like a grad ND filter. Now we still have that straight line going across, but I can adjust that if I go to the mask, click on that mask bar, and I go to subtract. And if I go to subtract, I go to down here to luminance range. So I can adjust that luminance range to anything that is actually in the foreground. So you see those trees getting darker, not any gray anymore. I can adjust that to be completely out of that mask and then use this gradient here to also adjust where that's coming in, and that adjusts how much is being added into the mask or subtracted out of the mask using your grad ND. This does present some artifacts when you're going through and doing something like this. However, I still like the in-camera grad ND effect the best, even though it does start to intersect some of those. One way to get around that would be to take two separate exposures and just blend out part of the exposure for a mountain or a tree in post-processing. Let's look at those ND filter shots now. So here's the in-camera ND filter that we used, and it's pretty amazing. This was for half of a second exposure, and it does a pretty good job blurring the water and darkening the overall exposure. Now it is a little bit hot, but anytime you have that, you can just drop the exposure down or your highlights down, whatever. So that's a pretty cool way to do it in camera and not have to clutter up your in-field way of doing things. Let's look at this other photo that we took with the ND filter on it. Now, the only problem that I have with this is that it does make the photo much darker. That's not a big deal. I can always bring up the exposure or bring up the shadows to balance that out. But if you look at this versus the other photo that was shot in camera, the filter actually made this shot a little bit more warm than I wanted it to be. Now, I can always drop the temperature in post-processing, but let's look at the other one side by side. See, this one is a little bit cooler, and then if I scroll all the way to the end, this one ends up being a little bit warmer. Now, that's not a huge deal. Like I said, I can adjust this, but with knowing that, it makes me worry about what the photo is actually going to look like and how the colors are going to be altered using a filter in field. For all of these, I prefer using the in-camera filters, but let me know your thoughts. If you're willing to switch over to all in-camera, if you like your filter system that you use in the field, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want more in-field videos, click or tap this video playlist showing up on your screen right now.